All right, we're looking at factoring polynomials day 2, and we're going to use our GPS to make sure that we are finding our way through factoring. So that's going to be finding your greatest common factor, your product, and your sum to get back to the types of ones where we have them back in the parentheses. So just remember that factoring is the opposite of multiplication. So we're looking to get back to those parentheses. So we first are going to look at, so I'm going to run through what we already have here, our greatest common factor. So I'm going to look at those numbers, 3, -2, and -5. And there's nothing in common there, so really there's a GCF of 1, but we just say none. So there's not going to be anything that's in front of those parentheses for my factors. Then I'm going to go ahead and find my product and my sum. So my product is the first and the last, so A and C, multiplied together, and they go into my first and second box. So that multiplied together gives me my product, -15p squared. My sum comes from the middle term of the -2p, and I'm going to use that to figure out what two numbers multiply to be -15p squared, but add up to be -2p. So we learned yesterday with our factor trees. Today we're also going to use our calculator. So on your calculator, if you go ahead and use your product, -15 divided by x, that'll get you your two factors. And if you even want to cheat a little bit more, you can do -15, my product, divided by x plus x, and that will make the sum in my third column. So if I go to my table, second graph to get to the table, these, I need to set that up back on auto for that to work out. These are all of our different factors that happen, and I'm looking for a sum of -2. So the two numbers that make that happen are 3 and -5, which is where I got that. So that -3 means that 3p times -5p gives me the -15p squared. And if I do 3p plus -5p, that gives me my sum. So that's where these two factors in the other boxes came from. So then my last step is to go about getting what's going to be in my parentheses. So that's the part that's on the outside of my box. So I'm looking at how to find the greatest common factor with those. So I kind of look at that first column and seeing what they have in common. So find that greatest common factor between the two. So if I look, I have 3p squared and 3p. So what do they have in common? 3p. So here we have a 3p, there we have 3p, which means I'm going to pull 3p out of that. So remember, this is the opposite of that multiplication, so I can use multiplication to get my other pieces. So if I look back in that box, 3p times what is going to give me p squared? P, which means that this one also has to have p, and I'm going to have p outside it, so that whole row has p in it. So if you kind of look, we had 3p, 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 and then I got p, p, p. So it always goes out in those rows. So I can move through and keep getting that. So if I look at my second one, I've got 3p times, I need the same exact thing because it's going to equal to 3p. So 3p times 1 would give me 3p. So that means I need another times 1 here, and then outside I'm going to put a +1 to show that that's going to be positive. Then I look at my last row, so something times p to give me -5p. That would be -5 times p would give me negative 5p. So then I jump down, and yep, negative 5 times 1 gives me negative 5. So I'm going to bring that negative 5 out. And that brings those two into my parentheses. 3p minus 5 and p plus 1 gives me my final answer to get back to those. Now remember that this is also the opposite of multiplication. So if I went through and multiplied those two together, which means I would have put them on the outside of the box, multiplied them all together, I should get this original one back. Okay, let's look at number 2. So I'm going to go through my GPS. So do I have a greatest common factor? 2y squared, 11y, so they don't have a y in common, and they don't have any numbers in common either, because 11 and 5, those can only break down into 1, and so can 2, so there's definitely not going to be anything. So this is when it's 1 or none. Okay, so then I want my product, which my product is A and C multiplied together. So I'll put those in the box. 2y squared times positive 5 gives me 10y squared. Okay, and then my sum is that middle number, that b value, so 11y. So that, I'm going to figure out what two numbers multiply to be 10y squared, but add to be 10y. So I'm going to go back to my calculator, put in 10 divided by x, and 10 divided by x plus x to get that sum. Go back to my table, and I'm looking for it to, there's that 11. So 1 and 10 multiply to be 10, but add up to be 11. So when I'm looking at this, I know that 10y times 1y would give me 10y squared, and 10y plus 1y would give me 11y. So those two things, a positive 10y and a positive 1y, end up inside my box. So now I'm going for my factors. Sorry, it's bell for the attendants. Okay, so if we look back at those, we've got that first column that I'm looking at. I've got 2y squared and 1y. So I'm looking again for that greatest common factor between those two. That would be just a y. Y is the only thing that they have in common. So I would have a y for both of those, which means I'm going to pull that y out up into the parentheses. And then I want to go through my multiplying and figure out what's left. So I have y times 2y would give me y squared. Okay, and then that means that I'm going to have times 2y there and bring out that 2y there. And then I'm going to look down at where I already have. I have y times 1 would give me 1y. So I know this other one has to be times 1 as well. And I'm going to bring out that positive 1 into my parentheses. And then I'm looking at that last column. Something times 2y gives me 10y. Well, 5 times 2y would give me 10y. And 5 times 1 would give me 5. So I'm going to bring out a positive 5 into my parentheses. There's no greatest common factor, so I'm just using the parentheses. Y plus 5 and 2y plus 1 are my factors. Okay, let's look to number 3. We have 10, 38, and 24, because I'm always starting with that greatest common factor. So I got to figure out what number could work there. Okay, if I want to find that greatest common factor between 3 numbers, your calculator can do it between 2. So if we go into math and we go to number, if we scroll down, we get greatest common, and they use the word denominator instead of factor, but greatest common denominator slash factor. So you can do that between two numbers easily and do 10 and 38 and get their greatest common factor. Make sure you're using the comma between them. But if I want 3, it gets a little more complicated. So I would want to find the greatest common factor of 3 numbers. We kind of have to do it twice. So we go back over to number. It was 9 for greatest common factor. And then I want to do another one because I want the greatest common factor of this guy and the other one. So I would do it again. Math number 9. Put my 10 and 38 inside that one, and then do another with 24, and that gets me still the greatest common factor of 2. You can also just do 2 numbers and figure out what's going on between those and see that we can still use that 2 that's going through them. So a few different ways of it, or you just look at which one do they all have factors of. I personally like to just do, okay, that's 2 and 5, that's 2 and, what's 38 divided by 2? 38 divided by 2 gives me 19. So 2 times 19, and then 2 times 12. So I can see that 2 in each and every one of those with those factors. I don't have a b all the way across, so my greatest common factor is just 2. That means that I have to divide everything by 2 to work it backwards. And we're going to put that outside of my parentheses to figure out what's going on there. So divide everything by 2. So basically it's just going to take those 2's out of each one of it. So then I get 2 times 5b squared plus 19b plus 12. So I have to do that before I can get my product and my sum, because I've got to pull that GCF out. Now I can say, okay, my product is going to be those 2 multiplied together, which means I need my box. So we're going to bring back my box. Oops. So there's my box. I'm going to put A and C inside there. So I have 5b squared positive 12, multiply those together, and I get 60b squared. So that's my product. And then my sum is my b value. So my sum becomes 19b. So we're looking for 2 numbers that add up to be 19b, but multiply to be 60b squared. So again, I'm going to go back over here and say I want 60 divided by x and 60 divided by x plus x. Go back to my table, and I'm looking for 19. There it is, and y squared. So then my 2 factors are 4 and 15. So I have positive 4b and positive 15b, because those multiply to be 60b squared, but also add up to be 19b. Okay, so we're going to then pull out my factors and look what they have in common. I have 5b squared and 15b. So I'm looking for the greatest common factor between those. Well, I know that 15 is 5 times 3. So that means that they both have a 5 in there, but since they have b squared and b, they also both have a b, so I can pull out 5b. And this is where I like to go back to my multiplication. 5b times b gives me 5b squared, which means that one has a b and this one pulls out a b. And then 5b times 3 gives me 15, which means this one has a 3 and this one has a positive 3. And then I look at my last row. 4 times b would give me 4b, and 4 times 3 gives me 12, so I have a plus 4. So I have to make sure I keep that GCF. 2 5b plus 4 times b plus 3 ends up as my final answer. Okay, so let's jump to part 2 to get the rest of these notes.